Welcome to Talk Tantra to me. It is such an honor to have you here, to have this divine knowledge make its way into your ears and lifestyle. This episode is coming from a very activated emotional space. I have no notes. I'm just free flowing with you guys here today. And just sharing very candidly that this has been like possibly the worst week of my life. And I share from this space, and I hesitated to record this episode because it's so vulnerable and I'm still so raw and there's so much moving through me right now. But also I find that this can be when it's most valuable and important to show up. Not only because I believe how you choose to show up when things are really hard really shows a lot of the character and the resiliency and the impact we have the capacity to make, but also because I think it's really powerful for you guys to see evidence of a way of being when things are hard and when we're suffering and there's pain and loss involved. So this past Saturday, my best friend, my dog, Stewart, very unexpectedly passed. And for those of you that have been following my journey for years, I've had Stewart for 7 years. And I got him in my early 20s. And at that time, it was really honestly at the very kind of beginnings of my Tantra journey. It was like probably a year before that I had just started learning about Tantra. And so he's really been here and been a part of my world and this world since the beginning, and was such a big part of my growth and evolution as a soul. And when I adopted him, his name was Stewart. And I normally would have changed his name. It's not a name that I would have chosen for my dog personally, but it just felt so right for him. And I truly believe it's because he, in so many ways, was really a steward to me and my growth. He was steward to me and my growth. I actually wrote something about, as I said, I have no notes pulled up, but at one point I wrote something about him being a steward. I'll have to find it. I don't think that I have it here in my notes. But anyways, he was a really great catapult for my growth and created so much love. And I know that I will never have a love like this again in my life. That's the thing about death and loss and grief. Grief really is love with no place to go. And I intend on doing a separate episode. I don't think it's this episode that's more about how do we handle grief. Right now, I just want to share what's with me and what I'm feeling and holding. And down the line, possibly with Andrew, my fiance, I'd really like to do a Tantra guide to grief. But for now, feeling the simultaneous like loss that is incredibly hard and icky and like, look, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I want to throw up, but also being surrounded by so much love at the same time. So many people checking in and sending their hearts and sending gifts and just like, and then feeling the love that I had for this animal, this grief that is evidence of how deeply I have loved and was loved. And yeah, I mean, and Stewart came into my life when, again, I was in my early 20s, and for so much of my life and so much of the time that I had with him, he was the only person that I felt safe to be my full self around. Honestly, it hasn't been up until recently really up until like I came out as this tantrika and started this podcast and all these things. Before that, I didn't really feel safe to be myself in the world. And he was really the only one that I was safe around. I mean, even like it took me months to tell my friends that I was doing this work professionally way back when I started. But he was my confidant, and he saw me in my most raw and loved me unconditionally through it all. And, you know, I have a lot of, I've moved through a lot with my family, especially in my early 20s. I struggled a lot with my relationships with my family members, specifically my parents. And so I didn't really have a lot of family. And then I also just didn't have very strong community, again, because I didn't really feel safe being myself. So I often was inauthentic and I didn't have really strong relationships or friendships. And so for so much of my life, it was just me and him. And after I got him, in the brief story of how I got him, I had just graduated college and I was dating an incredible man who I was not myself around, but he was incredible for who he was. But we were in love. And I had said, we've been dating for like a couple months. And I said, I'm either going to stay in Chicago where I was living at the time, or I'm going to go travel the world. But if I stay in Chicago, it'll be because I get a dog. I'm either staying in Chicago and getting a dog, or I'm going to go travel the world, because I can't do both. And so my boyfriend at the time said, well, let's get you a dog. And so he really pushed that agenda. And so I got Stewart, and it was incredible. And after, 8 more months of dating this guy, it became very clear that it wasn't right. It wasn't the right relationship for me or for him. And it wasn't fair to him, because I really had become who he wanted me to be. I became this very, just like a picture of like his perfect woman, because I wanted his approval and I wanted to be loved, but it wasn't me being myself. I wasn't being authentic or true to myself. And so he fell in love with not a whole version of me. And I didn't even know who I was at that point. I didn't even realize it. So I had to end that relationship. And it was especially heartbreaking for him, because, he was really in love with this woman who wasn't really me. And I just had to get out, because I knew I wasn't really me, and I needed to go find that and discover it. And so I ended up deciding to travel the world anyways, with Stewart in tow. And so it was just me and him. And we went, all over Europe, and he was really my sidekick. And there's so many delightful, beautiful stories that I would love to share, but some of those are sacred and some get to be shared with my close loved ones. And also, in the essence of time, I'm not going to go too in depth, but he was my family. He really was my family. I didn't have strong relationships. And in that way, the love was codependent. And Stewart himself was an adopted dog. He was a runt. He had all these health issues when he was first born. And so he had a lot of trauma, and we both had these like abandonment wounds, and we were working through them together. And it created this anxious, attached, codependent relationship that I had with my dog. And it's so funny, because this is something that I help people realize, and I help people work through, and I help people become more interdependent in their relationships. I help people process their anxious attachment styles and come into a more secure place. And that can come with the assumption that having a codependent relationship or an anxiously attached relationship is wrong or bad. But in reality, there's a lot of beauty in that. And that's not to say I ever want that type of relationship again, because now that I relate in a way that is secure and interdependent, I know that this is what's most expansive. But you can't discount the connection that comes with that sort of trauma bond and the depth and that is created from that. And it's interesting, because Stewart basically went into liver failure on Thursday and passed 2 days later. When I took him into the vet, he looked, by anyone's normal standards, he looked fine. That morning, he didn't eat his food and he threw up. And because we had past experiences, I just knew I should take him in. But he went in really able to walk. He jumped right up into my big Jeep, no issues. And by Saturday, he could barely lift his head. And watching him in that state was it's watching him in that state was really hard. And I'll go more into that later. I wanted to follow the track that I was on, in that a couple of years ago, he had a similar experience in that he was taken to the vet. And within a couple of days, they were like, he might not make it. You need to let us know what you want us to do as the end approaches, if it does, because it's looking likely it might. And obviously he made it through that, but it was awful. That time was in some ways worse than this time because it was my first experience with the potential loss. And I was so resistant to the feelings that came with it. And I was hurting so bad. And I didn't have the support that I have now. My partner at the time was really great in many ways through that, but he also didn't really understand and really just wanted to fix my feelings and make it better. And obviously he couldn't, because it is what it is. And I just needed to feel them. But all of that considered, and the fact that like I had community in LA, but like my community's gone stronger as I've evolved, and my relationship with my family has evolved. And so I actually have a more legitimate support system than like I've ever had in my entire life, beautifully so. But then I remember when I had to process his death 2 years ago and the potential of his death, it was like I wanted to kill myself. And I knew I would never act on it. I had suicidal episodes in my teens. I had self-harming. I never acted on any of the suicidal things, but I did act on some self-harming. So I hadn't felt that when it happened 2 years ago. I hadn't felt those feelings in like 5-10 years. And so, God, it was really intense. But the beautiful thing is that this time I didn't have that I want to kill myself feeling. I didn't have that life's not worth living anymore feeling. And I think that it comes down to a few things. It's just where I was in my journey, the support systems that I've had, which is one of the reasons that one of the first exercises that I often do, depending on why people come to me, is I ask them about their support systems. And I suggest that they have 5 sources of support in their lives, real support, people that they can tell anything to. And I have that. And I have that in humans now. But for years, I just had that in my dog and maybe 1 or 2 friends along the way. So that, I think, like, it is really an important piece. And I also feel that it had to do with my feelings about the emotions that were coming up. Because when we talk about feelings and emotions, all of this is ruled by the sacral chakra. And I knew this 2 years ago as well, but and I practiced this 2 years ago when things were happening. But I just want to illustrate in comparing these 2 instances that it can feel like we're doing the same thing over again, right? Like it can feel like we're in the same spiral of despair or anxiety or whatever the negative or low vibration emotion is you're experiencing. It can feel like, why am I feeling this again? But seeing very clearly how I handled 2 very similar episodes showed how it can feel like we're going in a circle, but in reality, we're going in a spiral up. It's kind of like if you were to imagine like a yo-yo, that's not what it's called. A slinky, those like cylinder spiral toys. So like if you were to trace the outside of that slinky, the wiring, it would feel like I'm going in circles. I'm doing the same thing over and over again. But what you don't realize is you're going up, you're spiraling up, you're going in circles up. So as you evolve, you're gaining greater perspective to be able to process those emotions, those feelings, those difficult circumstances, those traumatic circumstances from a more evolved state. I think that there's a misconception that once you find your tantric lifestyle, your spiritual practice, whatever works for you, that you're going to not have these feelings anymore. And that's not the case. I I've always been a very anxious person, and I still have anxiety, but the way that I process it and handle it and move through it is much different than it was before. And it's much faster and much more easeful. So when we're talking about emotions, we're talking about our sacral chakra, which is ruled by the energy of water. And I'll also say pleasure is also ruled by the sacral chakra. And so when we are experiencing really intense emotions and feelings, especially pain, we have this tendency of wanting to push it away, right? In the inverse, when we are experiencing pleasure, we want to grab onto that pleasure. We don't want to let it go. We want to hold on to it forever. And it's really funny because it's not funny, it's ironic that the day before Stewart passed, I had this gorgeous day. It was so simple, but it was like, I remember thinking like, this feels like one of the best days of my life in its simplicity. And that's also such a tantric thing. I was at home all day. Andrew was upstairs working for most of the day. So I kind of had my own space, but then we reconnected at night and had this really amazing sex. But during the day, I was just setting up things around the home, and I was reading my book and cuddling Stewart and enjoying my coffee and just having a sacred day off. I was in the pool. I was in the pool for the first time. I was in this house for over 2 weeks, and I hadn't once got in our new pool at our new house. I finally did. And I talked to my friends on the phone, and I remember, and then I masturbated. I masturbated, and Andrew and I had incredible sex. But while I was masturbating, I had this fear come up, like that it like was like, oh, this is gonna go away. I'm not always gonna feel this amazing. And like, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose this incredible good feeling that I'm having today. And guess what? As soon as I tried to grab on to the goodness that I was experiencing, it went away. I immediately shifted into anxiety. And so what I'm trying to say is, when we feel these feelings of pain, we're trying to push it away. When we're feeling these feelings of pleasure and goodness, we're trying to grab it. But in reality, all feelings and emotion are like water. They're just like water. And so if you're going to, let's say, turn on the faucet and try to grab the water, the good feelings, grab that water, how does that go? How does that work for you? On the inverse, if you're feeling pain, you're trying to push it away, you're trying to push the water away, how does that work? In both instances, you're not successful. You're not able to grab the feeling or the water. You're not able to push away the feeling or the water. In the end, you only become more frustrated because you're not successful, but you're also not experiencing the innate feeling available to you if you just hold your hand in the water and let it glide down your arm, down your skin. It's the same with emotions. We try to push or pull them or grab onto them. Not only are we not successful, because that's just not how it works, we're also missing the opportunity to just fucking feel it. And that's been so much of my process the past few days. I gave myself a lot of space. I completely stepped back from pretty much all of my business. I did have a few clients that I had some in-person sessions with. And funny enough, they were both clients that flew in, or didn't. One flew in, one drove in from out of town to work with me. And I really hummed and hawed about whether I was going to do those sessions. And in the end, it came down to a few things, one of which, I wanted to be in integrity with them. So I shared what was going on and, let them know so that I wasn't coming from a place of inauthenticity. But I also was very fortunate that these were two clients that I've worked with a lot. Both of them are very dedicated to the path, and I'm very grateful to have, the work-life balance in which my clients are aware of some more intimate details of my life, because being honest about my journey, I feel, is one of the greatest assets in inspiring and being evidence of what's possible. So it's been a lot. And I'll kind of go back to the timeline as well of things. Again, I don't have notes today, so I'm just free flowing with with what is here. But I took Stewart in on Thursday. There was a lot of anger and frustration as well to be in this space, because he had actually had some symptoms like 2 weeks prior. So I brought him in 2 weeks ago, and they did his blood, and they were like, yeah, things are not looking like perfect, but we'll just put him on some medication and just let us know if anything changes. And so it was very much, I was under the impression that, okay, cool. Like we have the medicine, and like, if anything changes, we're going to have time to like do something about it. When in reality, that wasn't the case. And when I went in to this emergency vet to see Stewart, they were very understaffed, and it was really frustrating. I was really angry because I just wanted them to see my dog and to tell me what was going on. And that tended to be a pattern throughout the experience. You know, he's in there for 2 days, and I'm calling to say, how's everything going? We'll call you right back. No one's able to speak to you right now. And then it's 2 hours later, you know, and even just talking about it now, I feel that anger just bubbling up. And so much of the past few days has been almost hourly. I need to have some type of emotional release, whether that means crying or screaming or hitting something, just acknowledging what I'm feeling and being in it. And again, I feel very fortunate to have a partner that's like, you're doing great, feel it all. I have a therapist who's like, feel it all. I have support systems that are checking in on me. And that's so much more that we'll go into with the Tantra Guide to Grief, how to support yourself and others in the process of loss. But yeah, I took him in, and then by the next day, I was like, he's looking really mangy. He's looking really bad. But the vet was really kind of talking around everything and not really being very direct with us. And it was really frustrating to get answers from her about what was happening. And again, she kind of made it sound like we had time. Like she kept saying, you know, we'll recheck things, you know, on Sunday, then we'll have a better idea of like if things are actually working or how we're going to proceed. Cause I'd ask, you know, does he have like days left, or is it weeks or years? And she was like, you know, oftentimes we see dogs in this condition that potentially could last 2 or 3 years if the medicine works. If not, then we'll reassess then. And so it was just very confusing. So anyways, by day 2, Saturday, that morning, I went in and I noticed that he was having trouble standing. And so I was like, at that point, I acknowledged like he's dying. He's on his way out. But it was who knows how long this is. Because again, just 2 days ago, he was standing and he could turn around again, because they said something similar to me last time on day 2. And the next day he was getting better. So but by that evening, we got a call, and it was like, we would like you to come in to speak with us, which was also really frustrating, because they didn't say we need you to come in because we're going to need to put your dog down tonight. It was, we need to just speak with you. But I knew, I was reading between the lines. I felt it. And I said, I want to take him home. And the vet was like, just come in. We'll talk to you here. And, yeah. So we get there, and I'm in the lobby, and I'm of course crying, and they immediately bring me into a room with Andrew. And it's frustrating because they immediately bring us into this room, but then we're waiting for like 45 minutes to see him, which again, that's like frustration. And so they bring us into this room. Eventually they bring in Stewart, and he is not good. Again, like he suddenly couldn't stand on his own, and he was having trouble looking, but all he wanted to do was look into Andrew and I's eyes and just again offer this deep presence. And it was really sweet, because while I was like on the way to the vet having a panic attack and screaming and crying, Andrew was very calm. And when we got into the room with Stewart, I was very intentional in that I knew that I wanted my last moments with him to be peaceful. And I wanted them to be, I didn't want Stewart to be worried about me. I wanted him to know that I was here for him, and I was this rock, and I was just giving all this love and holding presence. And of course I was sad and I was crying, but I was more contained. Andrew, on the other hand, it finally hit him. It finally hit him what was happening. And he went into the more intense emotional release. And he had his own beautiful breakthroughs around his relationship with Stewart. And in those moments, all Stewart wanted to do was just like get closer to Andrew, to calm him down, to calm his sadness and his fears, because that's who Stewart is. He just wants to be there and give and receive love. Just such a being of just heart chakra, like overflowing expansion, and just watching him like struggle to get closer to Andrew. Some of the things that Stewart taught me were just this incredible unconditional love. You know, the next day we buried him, which I'll get into, but with the day after, I went to go visit him at his grave on Monday, and I had this feeling of jealousy of the dirt that was holding him, jealousy of the earth that would hold him forever, because I couldn't do that ever again. I held him for the last time when we buried him. And so it's just this incredible feeling of like, oh, like I just want it. And ironically, jealousy is just not an emotion that Stewart ever understood or got, because it's really funny with all of my exes and even Andrew, they've all experienced this jealousy of the deep connection that I had with Stewart, with my dog. And just to like speak into like that for a second, like I know that everyone says that their relationship to their pet is special, and I truly believe that it is. And there was just something really fucking special about Stewart. And from the moment that I got him, I said, he's going to be a human in his next life. There's no way. Like, this dog is just too tapped in, tuned in, all of it. And I had like ex-lovers writing on, like, I haven't even posted on Instagram yet about my loss, or Facebook, or anywhere, but I had ex-lovers posting about it and sharing like their relationship to him, and sharing how special he was and such an incredible soul he was. And I had one of my dear friends, Justin was actually the one that encouraged me to speak about this now. I was kind of saying, I think I'm going to wait until I'm more contained and have a better process. And he's like, what you're telling me right now, the world needs to hear, to have these reminders of the preciousness of life, and, you know, the way of processing in this way. And I said, you're right. But Justin had shared that he cried about Stewart, and he had only met Stewart like twice. Like when we were doing retreats, flying in and out, Justin like stayed the night at my place the night before. And even he said that he cried about this dog. And so I think that it just, again, just speaks into his specialness. But Stewart was such a growth for me. I mean, I got him when I was 22, and figuring out how to travel with a dog at 22, and there's all this paperwork, and it was just such a lesson, and everything is figure outable. And like, I was so anxious every time I went to the airport with him, and learning to be the master of my circumstance and to regulate myself was huge. Being present, being playful, being loving, like so many things this dog gave me. He also protected me. He provided for me before I had a life-term partner. I truly believe that Stewart waited until I met Andrew for this to come in, and for him to make this exit. Because he was only 7. I thought that I had double the amount of time with him, because most that are mutts and small tend to last a lot longer. But Stewart was really special, and I want to veer into a little bit of the spirituality as well, and then jump back onto the timeline of that night. So Stewart is Anubis. And if you don't know who Anubis is, if you're watching the video, I have this little Anubis here that you can see, this little black dog. Anubis is an ancient god of Egypt, and he was like the guardian of death. He guarded the gates of the underworld. He was very much a conspirer with Osiris. And you can look into all of that myth and legend. I'll share briefly, though, that Osiris was Isis's consort. Isis is a goddess of Egypt that I very much resonate with, in that she is the goddess of sexuality and femininity and magic. And the legend of Osiris, Isis, and Anubis is that basically Osiris, who was Isis's lover, was killed by his brother Seth. And this brother Seth dismembered Osiris, cutting off all the parts of his body and hiding them all over the world. and it was Isis and Anubis together, that like Anubis was like, I want to reclaim my lover and bring all of his pieces back together. And it was Anubis who helped her find all the pieces and bring them back together. And then the only piece she couldn't find was his cock, which she molded out of clay from the Nile River. And then she basically fucked him back to life. What's interesting is, I think another thing that really helped me process his death was last year. I had a big process around death. Death was a huge theme of my year. In that, first of all, I did a training that was all about shamanic death. I had this relationship with like birth, sex, and death that really came up. So I was studying birth as well as death, because sex was something that I had a lot of experience with. But death and birth were not things I had a lot of experience with. But I saw birth, sex, and death as this holy trinity. So I did a shamanic training about it. I did a doula training. I also went on a sacred hunting experience with Monsalt and Ten, which I talked about in episode 116 of this podcast, Sacred Hunting, in which I actually harvested an animal. And so I had so many like connections with death last year. And also when I met Andrew, I called him this dark wizard, and I told him he reminded me of Hades. And at first Andrew was like a little bit like triggered about it, was like, really? And I was like, no, like that's like really powerful. To be the master of darkness and shadow is like incredibly needed in this world. Like there's so much distortion in the light. And my work often involves really reclaiming the shadows and seeing darkness as this beautiful thing. You know, the baby is born from the darkness of the womb, the seed from the darkness of the soil, the caterpillar and the chrysalis, you know? And so to me, like that whole relationship of understanding death and seeing death as an equal part of life, that we're actively buying into and choosing death in every moment, whether parts of ourselves are dying, which a big part of myself has died in the last year as I've chosen a life partner. I'm no longer this maiden. I'm now moving into being a matriarch. It gives me chills even just saying it. And so that was a big piece of this journey as well, and understanding this death of my beloved dog, who was really there for the entirety of my maiden journey and chose to exit as I transition. And there's so much frustration too around the fact that so much of my sadness around his passing is grieving the vision, because I envisioned Stewart being there for my babies being born. And he's such a lover and so good with kids. And I was so excited to see that. And so grieving the vision of what was possible has been seemingly insurmountable. We also just moved into this gorgeous house. And I used to always tell Stewart, mommy is working really hard. She's going on this work trip so she can get you a yard one day. And now finally we have this fucking yard. And he dies 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, less than 3 weeks later. So that's been a big piece as well, as understanding that it's so much is also about the vision. And it's the same for relationships too. When you lose a relationship, whether it's a divorce or a breakup, oftentimes what's a bigger piece of the grieving is the death, but even more so the vision of the life that you thought was happening for you together. So anyways, back to that timeline. So Saturday night we went in, and basically it was very clear that like, I wanted to take him home. I didn't want him to die in that place, but seeing how fast he deteriorated from even where I saw him that morning, where he could still kind of stand and now he can barely lift his head. It was like, we can't get him into the car and bring him home. I mean, like I would have loved to do euthanasia at home. Is something, I don't know. Obviously I didn't have time to think about these things or to make these sorts of decisions. So it became obvious that we were going to have to do euthanasia that evening. And so it was a really beautiful moment to be in that. They basically gave us this button and said, call us when you're ready and we'll come in and we'll administer the drugs. We obviously elected to be in the room for it. But, we had a few hours with him, cuddling on the floor, giving him lots of kisses, holding him for the last time. He's struggling to do anything but just at the very beginning, I was very grateful that when he first got there, he was still more connected to us. He could make eye contact and but by the end, again, he couldn't really lift his head by the final moments. In those final moments, he was laying in my lap, and he he just started to kind of, it was like he was closing his eyes and kind of falling asleep. And it's like, I have this button. It's like, how do you know when is the right, you become the master of death in a moment. And when he had that moment of almost falling asleep in my lap, I knew that this is it. This is the moment. So I got the button and pressed it, and they came in and they put the drugs in his IV, and gratefully, because he was taking all of his medication by IV already, they didn't have to move him or anything. They were just able to put it into his IV. And that moment of transition from life to death was so palpable and so beautiful. You could feel literally the spirit leaving. And outside, we had this gorgeous sunset right outside the window. And it was beautiful. And I said to Stewart in that moment, come find me again. Come find me again, whether it's in, I like to think that maybe he'll be one of my actual babies one day. That would be really powerful and beautiful, but there's no guaranteeing that, obviously. So that was the end. And they asked us if we wanted to cremate. And I didn't really know, but I felt like no. So we took him home with us. They put him in a little doggy coffin. We put him in our fridge overnight. The next morning we woke up, immense grief, immense pain, couldn't sleep, can't eat. But it was time to bury him. And I got this very clear, he wants to go to his favorite trail one last time. I packed a bag with some sacred objects from around the house, some photos of Andrew and I with Stewart, as well as some of his favorite treats and fruits. I packed some holy water that I collected from Mother Mary's resting place, as well as some oils that I got in Egypt. And we brought them all to this trail that is right by this. There's one spot on the trail that has this really lovely little mini waterfall, and Stewart and I would often sit there and just watch the water and play. And so we went a little bit off the trail and we dug, and Andrew was incredible. He was the sacred masculine doing most of the digging and holding. And then I had this tapestry that I used at Tantra retreats of Isis, like big tapestry fabric that had Isis with her wings outstretched, which to me represents me in many ways, this goddess of sex and magic, and my relationship with Anubis, my little Stewart Anubis Bean is his full name. And just a little background story. I call him Bean because when he was a baby, and even now, like when he curls up, he's all black and he kind of curls into this little bean shape. So Stewart Anubis Bean. So when we had the hole dug, I laid the tapestry in the hole so that when we wrapped him back up, he would be wrapped in my wings for eternity. And so we put him in, and it was my last time holding him there at the grave. And I was a little bit worried that I would be grossed out or weirded by the dead body. And to give people context, this is my first experience with death, true, real death. Again, like I had harvested an animal, and a hunting experience is very different than having a connection with an animal, even though I feel like I had a connection with that animal as well. It's different than, it's a different intention. And no one in my family has really died except for my grandma, but she was like old and I wasn't there for the death, and it was a different experience. So anyways, I take him out of the coffin and I'm holding him, and it's my last time holding him. And it was like he was alive again. Actually, it was not weird. It was not gross. I felt very comfortable with his dead body. In fact, I didn't want to let it go. Even though it had been like a whole night, and he's actually cold and actually hard now from being in the fridge. But anyways, I gave him my last kisses, and we laid him in the grave on top of the tapestry. We put in his favorite fruits. We put in the oils and the sacred water. Andrew even put in a few of his dad's ashes, because we really felt like they would be good pals in the afterlife together. And we wrapped him up. We wrapped him in that tapestry, and we placed the earth above him. And by synchronicity, that morning, I had just found this. While I was getting flowers for his grave as well, I found this heart-shaped rock just sitting in our landscaping. And it was like someone had put that there. It wasn't like just naturally occurring there. And I never noticed it until that morning. So I took that and we kind of had that as his gravestone. And we also planted a blackberry bush that I got at Home Depot when we got the shovels. I planted the blackberry bush above him. And we also got some other rocks from the stream and put them all around and said our final words. And I'm so proud of the burial that we gave this incredible being of light, and just creating a new way of relating to death. Andrew said, why you always must make things more complex than they need to be. Any normal person would just cremate their dog. That's the easiest way. But he was also like, I'm so grateful that I get to have this experience with you and I get to see a new way of being. And I'm not saying cremating is bad. I think that it's perfectly fine and whatever works for you. But what made sense to me was giving him back to the earth in this particular way. So anyways, after we put the final soil on and the ornamentations on the grave, I had brought this deck, and it's called the Starseed Oracle deck. And I got this deck at the beginning of the pandemic, which, we all went through that experience. And being a single woman living alone, having a dog during that time was such a godsend. And so I got this deck as well around that time. And anyways, also around that time, I had this dream, having lots of prophetic dreams around the pandemic. And in this dream, Stewart and I were these orbs of light that were dancing through the cosmos. And my orb of light was like sunset on the ocean, orange and blue and gold and pink and opalescent. And Stewart's was this spiral rainbow, all the colors together, just bouncing ecstatically. And it was just this gorgeous dream of us as just souls, not embodied at all. And so when I pulled a card from this deck, I asked, where are you going next? Where is Stewart going next? And I pulled this card. If you're watching the video, you can see, and if not, I'll just describe. This card is a spiral a spiral orbit aura of rainbow colors with someone diving into the center of it. It's literally Stewart's aura that I pulled out of this deck. And the deck has 50 something cards, the odds. And I don't think I've ever even pulled this card before from the deck. And so that just felt really special. Like he was speaking directly to me. And to memorialize him, I wanted something that I would carry with me always, forever on my body as well. And I'm not a tattoo person. So I wanted to get a ring to memorialize him. And the funny thing is I had started looking at rings to memorialize Stewart months ago, because when I got engaged, the designer that we picked my ring from had all these really cool, like, marketing images of like rings stacked together and just like lots of ornate, I don't know. And I just loved it. I was like, I love that style. I kind of want to just like get a bunch of rings now, but I want them to have meaning. And so I thought about the things that I would like to memorialize in my life. And I thought about, when I have a child, I'm going to get a ring for each child. And then I thought, well, of course I'm going to have one for Stewart too. And so I'd already started looking at rings that had rainbow stones on them. And interestingly, I went to go purchase the ring that I had in mind. And I'm looking at these rings online, and I go to the one that I'd liked a lot, and it was a little pricey, which is why I'd waited to purchase it. But now obviously felt like the right time. And I'm checking out, and I notice that the designer is based in Tel Aviv. I am flying to Tel Aviv a week from yesterday. Next Tuesday. So like less than 10 days from his death, I am flying to this place where this ring is being made and produced and by this artisan. And so I messaged her and asked if I could pick it up there. And it just feels like such a right way to honor him, that because again, Stewart traveled the world with me. So the very next place that I'm traveling to, I get to pick up this memorabilia of him. And it's like he gets to come with me on my next journeys and be with me. And I'm just so excited for that. So it's all just to say, like, synchronicity and fate and just being available and open to the spirit speaking to you and not bypassing and just receiving it and following your intuition and following your desire and your pleasure. It makes no sense for me to be spending money on this expensive piece of jewelry right now when I just have all these new vet bills and had to cancel a bunch of work. But I so trust. And because of my trust, I'm being led into greater initiation with this. And I'm really curious to see what this land brings to me, as I also go to Petra, which is an ancient site of the goddess as well. So anyways, yeah, it's been awful. And I'm really, I made it through this without bawling, which is a I don't want to say that it deserves an accolade. I think that I'm now moving into the space where I can be more celebratory and more in that loveliness of the time that I did have with him. And also, again, just trusting that our spirits will find each other again. And it's not an if, it's like, I know it, I feel it. It's there. We are one. Because a few days ago, it was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be happy again, and that's how it often feels with these really intense emotions, especially of loss and grief and pain. It feels like it's endless, that it will never end. And it's such a lesson of this too shall pass. Just like the very good feelings that I had the day before I took him into the vet, this too shall pass too. And that is what it is. And that's life. And in these moments of intense, deep depths, there are lessons, there are initiations. And I also have another episode that I'll share with you guys. If you are going through a hard time for any reason, whether it's because of a loss or because of a medical diagnosis or breakup or whatever, soul assignments and initiations is episode 68. I recorded that one a little over a year ago. So yeah, I recommend that one as well. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being with me here in this. I'm trying to think if there's any last words that I'd like to share with you on this. I just want to say as well that I'm so here for receiving all of the love from everyone and anyone that listens to this and wants to reach out. So thank you for that in advance. And to Stewart, to this incredible being, this Anubis, I love you. And yeah. Thank you again for tuning in today. I guess I'll also add as well that I think that a big part of me getting to this place of being able to process these things in this way is by living a tantric lifestyle and allowing myself to be turned on by even the most intense depths and darks, like being able to feel into, even when I'm in this intense sadness, grief. It's like I'm alive. I can feel the aliveness in me. And that alone has an edge of pleasure and joy and celebration. And with that, I have a course called Turned On by Life. It is a tantric journey for the art of living. And it's really great for understanding emotional intelligence, feeling into the potential of your life, stepping into your greater purpose and artistry, and moving through the dense to be able to alchemize into a greater existence. So check that out at talktantra2me.com/turned-on, or you can go to my website and then click the Work With Me tab. But yeah, thank you so much for holding space for this with so much love and gratitude. Have a sexy and spiritual day, and I'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta-ta.